Hey guys, hope you're doing well. It was a fantastic kind of week. If you kind of followed our advice and tailed us, I think, with the exception of me kind of missing the Shaqiri goal, which was a little bit of a fluke to be honest. But we recommended going for four or five English players, and that being like the kind of backbone of your team and the backbone of your three free transfers, and then your potential fourth as well. And so I think most people would have had four English players and had a wonderful week in my opinion, especially with the captaincy over someone like Kane or Shaw, which were the players that we recommended on the live stream, right? So if we look at this week, if you have no chips left, this is the kind of video for you. If you have a wildcard slash limitless pick still to go for, we're gonna make that video. It's gonna come out later today, and you can check that out on our YouTube channel. But this is about no chips, right? And no chips at this point means that we have five free transfers. And more often than not, I think you're going to be replacing, first of all, Spinazzola. You're going to be replacing some Swiss players that you picked as differentials, some players that you might not have already transferred out from match day three, or rather the round of 16, sorry. And you would have also maybe transferred out some Belgian players as well, because I don't think any of us expected Czech Republic to necessarily win. You might have had some Czech Republic players as well in terms of Schick and Sufal as differentials that we described last week, and they would have actually got you points. So that's a good thing, but you still have to replace them. And I think what makes sense here is that we'll kind of go through with the forwards, the midfielders, and the defenders, and the keepers. And we'll kind of describe briefly some strategy first. So I think it makes sense at this point to have quite split teams in the sense that I think you actually want to stack most of your teams towards day one because you're less likely to go for these Danish players, right? I think Mala is the true only kind of top tier pick that you have from the Danes. And then you're most likely going to stack your team with English players. Now, if you have five English players at this point in the tournament, you're basically stacking your team with, let's say, six players at this point, which means that you have five players left to fill with Italians and Spanish players in terms of a starting 11. And then if you want to fill out your bench, it's once again going to be four more players from Spain and Italy, right? So a lot of the discussion is going to be focused on that kind of Spain-Italy game and what I think will happen and what are the best picks for that game. And then we'll talk about, day two, but that's going to be more stock standard routine. We'll still talk about differentials today, and that's why they're here on the spreadsheet. But let's go with day one first. So with day one, Spain versus Italy, it's going to be a very interesting tactical affair because Spinazzola's absence means that Italy will somewhat have to change the style of play that they have. Their reliance on having Spinazzola as a winger and then allowing Insigne to kind of move forward in space and play almost as a second striker, allowing them to kind of play like an asymmetrical 4-4-2 almost, means that I think Italy will have to be a little bit more reliant on, once again, their wingers and also their midfielders. And I think Immobile's form in this tournament has dropped substantially. But the fact that you only really have four true forward options remaining at this tournament, and I think Dolberg is going to struggle for chances versus England, means that probably at the end of the day, Immobile is going to be someone that you're thinking about bringing in. If you're, let's say, like replacing someone like Lukaku, right? And you already have Harry Kane in your team. Morata as well is going to be the pick that I have over Gerard Moreno. If you want to talk about Morata, in my opinion, I think simply put, he put in a lot of hard yards versus Croatia. He played the full 120 minutes. And I think from the point of view of Luis Enrique, he substituted Morata very early to actually kind of rest him for the next game. Now, this was a very risky decision, of course, because Spain ended up going to extra time regardless, and Moreno struggled and missed a lot of chances. And I think, it's undoubtedly the case that Morata will start. And I just don't have that much kind of faith in Moreno being a differential pick because, first of all, he's missed a lot of chances in this tournament, more so than Morata actually. And I think just the underlying statistics show that Morata has, one of the highest expected goals per 90. And yes, while Morata isn't one of the most clinical players in the world, you have forwards left. You have four forwards left to pick, and the Spain team still builds a lot of chances. And I think what people seem to neglect from this Italy team, despite the fact that they're so well oiled in terms of defense, is the fact that they play a very open game. And the open transition means that there's a lot of space to run in behind at times. There's a lot of space for chaos to kind of enter the game. And we saw that with the Belgium game, right? It was very end to end, back and forth. Now, of course, Italy got the better of Belgium, but there were a few chances, in my opinion, where I think, let's say, if Kevin De Bruyne was a bit more fit, not playing with the torn ligament, for example, that Spain could have exploited Italy a bit more. For that reason, I think Morata makes sense. And let's move forward to kind of the midfielders in day one. in Spain versus Italy, I think, simply put, I think we'll probably see Torres and Sarabia. Hold off on your substitutions, of course, because I think Dani Olmo could be someone who starts. Um, so in that, in terms of, for me, I think the order of preference is that I like Sarabia in terms of his ability to get an assist, not so much his ability to get a goal. I think his positioning is very good in terms of how he kind of moves on to rebounds, but the way he plays for this team is more as a creative force and someone who kind of can kind of cut back for the striker at times and play a little bit as an inside forward. And I think that's kind of what he provides to the team. Whereas someone like Ferran Torres is more of a traditional winger. He looks for crosses, which is how he got one of his assists in the Croatia game. And then he also kind of tries to beat people one on one as well, which we saw once again in the Croatia game when he was kind of matched up against Guardiola. And for that reason, I think Ferran Torres is probably the highest priority for me, and then Sarabia, unless Olmo actually starts. And in that case, of course, you kind of take Sarabia off as a preferential pick, and then you're going to go for Olmo. Why I've included Pedri here is actually for a simple reason. I mentioned that tactically, I think Spain versus Italy will be a very open game, and that gives a lot of space, I think, for the midfielder to find these kind of passes in between the lines. And for me, I think Pedri is one of those players where his statistics are off the charts, right? He's a deep line player, a little bit like Xavi back in the day, but he still plays in quite an offensive position in the pitch. He's not like a holding midfielder, right? So he still has the opportunity to kind of look for that dead final ball and maybe get you an assist. And at this stage in the tournament, a player with an assist is super worthwhile because I think we're expecting more low scoring games. There are less kind of top tier premium picks, and Pedri could be an interesting option actually as a differential for me, even though he's only scored an own goal in this tournament so far. But if we go into the Italian midfield, I think it's clear that Italy will have to rely truly on their wingers, and their fullbacks will have to play a more supportive function as opposed to a more offensive kind of creative function like Spinazzola does for Italy, because you're kind of going to have Emerson inside the team, and there's a lot more pressure on Insigne to create more on his left, and Chiesa as well. I think the reason why Mancini will likely stick with these two wingers is because they really do attack in terms of at Spain at the right way. We saw Orsic become a very strong threat against Azpilicueta, and I think Azpilicueta is someone who struggles a little bit more with a technical, pacey kind of winger, and this is exactly what Insigne is. He can cut inside, and he can also beat you in pace down the line, and that's going to be a little bit troublesome for Azpilicueta to deal with, even though he is more defensively positioned. The opposite will kind of happen for Chiesa, right? He is more that traditional winger who can cut down and then cut inside if he drives down the right. And Jordi Alba is someone who will be transitioning, very often from attack to defense for the Spanish side. So with how fast Italy actually kind of progressed the ball from out of the back, Chiesa is someone who could find himself running in behind versus, where Jordi Alba should have been positionally if he was to defend statically. And I think for that reason, Chiesa has opportunities to kind of maneuver into the Spanish box and perhaps create some chances. Nico Barella was someone we talked about in the tactical preview versus Belgium for Belgium versus Italy, and he had a fantastic game, right? He had a fantastic game. And what he does for Italy is he plays a more of a free roaming role where he's allowed to move off the ball and look for opportunities to kind of exploit space. And that's what he'll do. In a more open game, this is what kind of suits Barella's play style. And I think for that reason, I think with the way that Spain play as well sometimes to try to play a little bit more ambitious in terms of chance creation, then Barella could be an interesting option. Verratti is a more deep lying player compared to the rest, but simply I would kind of equate him to Pedri in the sense that he can find that perfect pass and that perfect assist, and that's kind of why he has already had 2 assists in this tournament. If we move on to the defenders in day one, this is once again an interesting kind of dilemma for me. I think the defensive options here are very poor, with the exception of Alba. I think Alba once again provides so many attacking options, provides so many kind of chance creation opportunities for Spain. And ironically, so does Laporte. If you actually look at the stats, Laporte is one of the greatest ball carriers for the Spanish side. He's given the free license to kind of move very high up the field. And with Spain's high line, it actually means that he doesn't really find himself in very far back versus opponents. He might actually settle very high up in the field and be allowed to kind of drift forward and then look for that kind of dead ball final pass to a player, and he could potentially get an assist. And then on top of that, in terms of aerial threats, I think he's the clear largest one in the Spanish side altogether. And he's proven that with the goal. So set pieces we know play a large role in terms of international tournaments and international games, and he is that kind of threat, I think, second to Jordi Alba in terms of priority. I'm looking now at the kind of Italian fullbacks, and I think they'll play Emerson and they'll play Giovanni Di Lorenzo. And simply put, I think these two players won't be creating as much on the left in terms of Emerson. I expect Emerson to play quite high up in the structure because when we saw Emerson play in match day 3, that was what he was doing. But Di Lorenzo will kind of stay back a little bit more as a right back and allow Italy to kind of play out of almost a back 3 or a back 4 if, let's say, Jorginho comes in. And for that reason, I think it's not the best to really have these players. They're actually quite costly. Di Lorenzo is, of course, a cheaper option. But I still think it makes more sense to really hedge your bets in terms of the defenders in day 2. So I would kind of avoid that, or maybe just pick one of the differentials alongside Jordi Alba. In terms of the keepers, I think Unai Simon and Donnarumma are kind of on an equivalency basis. It really depends on who you think is going to win, Spain versus Italy. I'm not going to discuss much about that. This is a pick that I think you guys can make for yourself. I still think the game is tactically very open. And there's potential once again for this game to be kind of like a 2-1 game, a 3-2 game even. So I'm not really expecting any of these players to keep a clean sheet. But if you're going to pick one of them, I think maybe Unai Simon is better for budgeting reasons. Donnarumma, I think, probably has a better chance to get a clean sheet because I think the actual Italian defense is a bit more organized in terms of how often they make mistakes. And they make mistakes much less than the Spanish side, in my opinion. If we move on to day 2, once again, as I said, the forwards is going to be Harry Kane is 100% nailed on. We can just look quickly at the stats here and pretty much show that, he is that kind of quintessential talismanic striker option, and I think he's improved in terms of his form, I think his daringness. We saw his kind of openness, I think, to taking like first touch opportunities, making runs, in behind his kind of defenders, running off the shoulder of them, dropping deep a little bit less as well in the structure that they were playing today with Mount. And for that reason, I think Kane is nailed. And Dolberg is a decision that you'd like to make with Immobile, because I think this Danish side does attack very often. And I think Dolberg has kind of asserted himself into the side in terms of being that kind of key focal point that I think this Danish side is looking to distribute towards too. And you could also argue that Poulsen might actually come back, because I think Poulsen had a very good game as a substitute. But how can you deny someone like Dolberg, who's already scored 3 goals in the last 2 games? Simply put, I think Dolberg probably has a little bit more priority over Poulsen. But I think he has very few chances to kind of score versus this English side that have one of the best defenses that we've seen in Euro Cup history. In terms of the midfield, for that reason as well, I actually would probably downgrade Damsgaard and Højbjerg now just to simply differentials. Damsgaard was actually playing a little bit more on the right today, and we saw much less efficacy from him when he doesn't play with Mala on the left. And I actually prefer his ability to play as a winger and then cut inside onto the right and kind of look for goal scoring opportunities like that, for a finesse shot, for example. But he wasn't able to really do that today. He had a great one-on-one opportunity actually running with a keeper, but his kind of confidence shooting from the near post wasn't fantastic. Højbjerg, of course, is one of those kind of leading players for this Danish side in terms of progressing the ball, and he does look for these kind of deep line passes sometimes, but he's not 100% glued for an assist. And once again, he's playing versus England, so that's gonna be a really tough task. Sterling, Mount, and Sancho. So for me, Sancho becomes my differential, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But of course, we all know the kind of output that Sterling has provided in this tournament, and for that reason, he's a must kind of have pick. First of all, he was one of the first midfielders to be substituted out in the game, and it's clear that Southgate thinks he's quintessential to the program, which is why he was subbed off. And the same with Luke Shaw. Mason Mount is someone who I think needed these 90 minutes to show whether he actually is able to kind of continue playing for this side as a starter, and I think he took that opportunity perfectly, in my opinion. Mount was able to get kind of a set piece assist, and that's also what he provides, I think, in my opinion, and why I've upgraded him to a best pick, because we've now kind of drawn down to a point in this stage where I think Denmark versus versus England is probably that kind of easier game where you have a clear overdog, and for that reason, it makes more sense to have more of those overdog picks, right? So Mason Mount makes a lot of sense to me at this stage, and I think even though he plays a little bit deeper, sometimes he just plays to support the wingers. His set piece kind of creation, Italy's and England's kind of improvement in terms of set pieces really means that he's kind of upgraded there, in my opinion. Sancho is someone who actually, that Gareth Southgate had tactically explained that he would like to use to exploit a back 5, and this Denmark side has moved into a back 5 in the last 3 games, as we know. And for that reason, I think, based off his really good performance today as well versus Ukraine, he might really have the opportunity to start again. And with Saka having a knock, and with Grealish maybe not really having that kind of ability to play on the right, at least based on the expectation of Southgate, I think Sancho makes a lot of sense as your differential pick. The defenders, I think, is a little bit more easy to explain. We all know Mala's ability to play. I think Mala has been one of the better players, playing actually on his weak foot on the left, even though he's actually right-footed. You know, with a beautiful kind of assist today and scoring the last two games. I mean, simply put, there's no reason to not have him on your team. You probably have him on your team already. But if you haven't, I mean, he would end up being a very simple and easy differential pick to pick. Shaw, Maguire, and Stones. I think that's the clear priority in terms of how I actually view this kind of backline and how you should rate them in your team. Maguire actually being cheaper than Stones makes him even more better, I think, in my opinion. He just scored off a set piece. We mentioned that Stones had previously hit the crossbar as well. And, you know, for that reason, I think it makes sense if you want to actually go 5 English players to maybe go for like four of those defensive options, right? Or rather 6 English players. So you can kind of go for maybe 2 English defenders and then Pickford as an example. Now, if we go to the keepers, I mean, it's just Pickford for me, and so it's kind of the same situation there. I think this English defense has been rock solid. You can't really kind of value your analysis based on the fact that, oh, if someone has to score like or concede eventually at one point. I mean, you know, we've been shown, I think, some glimpses today. For example, some mistakes from Walker as an example. But with the exception of that, I think they had a very rock solid game once again, and I think Pickford's also goalkeeping form has been good in this tournament. Still a little bit erratic as a player, but I mean, he's nailed on. And I think for that reason, if we actually look at my team selection, I've kind of reflected that, right? So I've decided to kind of I at this point have decided to kind of bring, you know, the full English kind of quintuple into my team. But I've kind of brought Laporte into my side to replace Munier. I've brought Kane into the side to replace Lukaku because, as I mentioned, I was just supporting Spain and Belgium for a little bit of fun. But you guys should already have Kane in your team. This might be a situation where you guys are probably thinking to maybe go for someone like Dolberg or Morata at this point. And it makes sense now, I think, because there aren't many other options. Chiesa, as I said, was someone who I think would start over Berardi, and I think this still remains to be the case. But if you can go for Insigne, do go for Insigne because, you know, Højbjerg could be a budget option or reduced to a budget option, and then you can go for Insigne like that, right? Torres and Sarabia, once again, I think are priority. But the other options are pretty clear, and I think, you know, would have been players that you already have in your team. So this is kind of my team selection. But I hope you guys had a wonderful week in terms of fantasy, in terms of kind of moving up in your leaderboards, and you know, let's wish for a great semifinals. We'll be streaming later on in the week, so stay tuned for that. But otherwise, wish you guys the best of luck, and ask any kind of comments you guys want in the comment section. Subscribe if our videos have been helping you out lately. Thank you guys.